They are here to examine the flag, section by section.
Anything that was marked, there should be a key at the bottom that tells you what it was. Those are areas that might have had a mold infestation.
They want the banner to last as long as the ideals it represents.
This symbol has become the symbol of the United States. That's what people think of when they think of the United States. They think of our flag.
That wasn't always the case. The Eagle, Lady Liberty, and George Washington inspired new Americans during and after the Revolution. The flag's identity wasn't forged until the War of 1812. Some call it the Second War of Independence. Yet again, America is David to Britain's Goliath.
Britain had 1,000 ships, America had 20.
It starts at sea with a series of disastrous naval battles. The fight moves to the Canadian border. British-backed Indian tribes consistently defeat American troops in the Northwest Territory. Then, the British occupy New Orleans.
This war had gone badly for the Americans from the start.
2 years in, the odds get worse.
In 1814, Napoleon fell, and this was free up thousands of additional troops for the war against America.
Nearly 30,000 British troops set sail for America.
The fact the United States had declared war in the first place, they viewed it as a tremendous act of treachery at the time when they were fighting Napoleon.
Fueled by fury, British ships cross the Atlantic and enter the Chesapeake Bay, just 60 miles from the American capital.
There had been fear early on that Washington would be invaded, and then when it wasn't, it sort of died away, and they all became a little complacent.
The Secretary of War was a man called John Armstrong, and he was one of those people who refused to believe the British would target Washington.
President Madison and Armstrong and Congress, they were very arrogant, thinking that no way they're going to get up the Potomac River this fall with all these troops that could potentially be brought against them.
By the summer of 1814, the complacency runs so deep, specific intelligence is ignored.
There's an anonymous letter that arrives in Washington in August that the British intend to sail up the Patuxent and land a force that will take the capital. That warning was not heeded.
British troops march east from the bay, heading toward Washington, D.C. Most American troops are hundreds of miles away on the Canadian border. 6 miles from the capital, the Redcoats clash with battalions of U.S. Army regulars and local militia sent to defend Washington. For the first time, the Americans face a British weapon of terror. The Congreve rocket.
3, 2, 1, fire. At the time, it was pretty much a terror weapon.
Steve Jones researches and reproduces 19th century artillery. Attached to a long stick and propelled by black powder, the iron missiles could travel up to 2 miles.
The sound of these things was extremely loud. Didn't matter if you were in front of it, behind it, you were hearing it and seeing it come at you. The smoke trail, they just didn't know what it was.
Compared to artillery, they were lightweight and portable. But convenience came with a price.
All this is a giant bottle rocket. If you've ever held a bottle rocket and fired it and tried to hit a specific target, you'll have to fire 100 of them before you even get close to where you're aiming at. They went all over the place.
They were unpredictable, but could be brutally efficient, lighting deadly fires wherever they landed. In the Napoleonic War, 200 British Congreves set the town of Boulogne ablaze in 10 minutes. Outside of Washington, near the small town of Bladensburg, Maryland, the rockets make an impression on the American president.
James Madison was the first United States president to be on a battlefield and actually face incoming enemy fire.
Madison flees to safety, but the Americans prove hopelessly untrained. Despite outnumbering the British, U.S. forces suffer what has been called the greatest disgrace ever dealt to American arms. Their retreat is so hasty, the battle becomes known as the Bladensburg Races. And the route to the capital is clear.
Washington was a very important target psychologically. By evening, they're there at the entrance to the city.
The city is unguarded.
Combination of ignorance, arrogance, and just plain stupidity left Washington vulnerable.
In a state of confusion, citizens flee in terror.
You know, it's a non-Twitter war, so you don't really know where anybody is. They have an idea, but they're conflicting stories about where the troops are.
Inside the White House, First Lady Dolly Madison waits anxiously for her husband to return.
There wasn't enough time to really pull together a plan.
Realizing that the British invasion can't be stopped, the First Lady decides to evacuate. She collects what she can from the White House.
One of the pieces that she's determined to save is this magnificent portrait of George Washington done by Gilbert Stuart.
Dolly instructs the staff to save it or burn it. The painting must not fall into British hands.
She knew that this would be just an amazing blow to American morale.
But she was risking a far greater humiliation.
If she hadn't evacuated, they would have taken her prisoner, and she would have been put in a cage and paraded through London.
By the time the First Lady decamps, she is only 2 hours ahead of the British soldiers. A servant locks the door and leaves the White House to its fate. But for the vengeful British troops, the first target is the U.S. Capitol.
The United States Capitol was like the great cathedrals of medieval Europe. All the money and the best artisans have been employed to create it. In the young republic, it represented the hopes and aspirations of America. And of course, it's a symbol of democracy.
That makes it a prime target for the British. Before destroying it, their leader, George Cockburn, mocks what it stands for.
There's a story that Rear Admiral Cockburn enters the Senate chamber and stands up on the Speaker's chair and says to the troops with him,
"Shall we burn this harbor of American democracy? All those in favor say aye. Aye."
With the houses of Congress in flames, the troops force their way into the White House.
They found a table laid for 40 because Dolly Madison had been expecting the military and the political leaders for dinner.
The invaders are only too happy to help themselves to the presidential feast.
Let's sit at this table and have dinner and enjoy her wonderful repast and toast the king. Then we'll burn the house.
They ransacked the White House and they burned it. All that was left was the shell. In 1814, the British burned the White House. And the best examples of their presence is under the front door of the White House. You will see a massive stone archway, and gray stones have been charred charcoal black by the fire set by the British.
I know you've been over at the White House, so I thought you might like to see a piece in our collection that relates to that. This is a piece of the scorched timber from the White House.
This is as good as seeing the president.
Oh, well, this is a piece that came out of the house during the Truman renovation.
The White House You can imagine this going up and all the splendid furniture. They could have taken Washington without burning, but they knew that this would strike at the morale of the country.
It's the final insult.
Ironically, the largest fire is set by Americans. Clerks at the Washington Navy Yard destroy its ships and supplies to keep them from British hands.
The flames were visible as far away as Baltimore. It was seen by some of the sentries on duty at Fort McHenry and other high points in the city.
Washington is in ruins. 60 miles away, the citizens of Baltimore are filled with dread.
The attack and taking of Washington really rocked Baltimore society. They realized we're likely the next target.
They knew that they were next, and they were prepared to succumb.
If the attack comes, they fear defeat would be inevitable. Today, a superpower. 200 years ago, the underdog. Locked in the jaws of war with the British Empire, America was risking its hard-won independence.
The British didn't want to recapture the colonies, but they were very interested in making sure the United States was never in a position again to declare war on Great Britain.
That meant controlling all access to the United States, from the Gulf of Mexico to British Canada.
The British commissioners are presenting their American counterparts with what were viewed by the Americans as conquerors' demands.
They demand a new Native American state that would prevent the U.S. from expanding its borders to the west. Defeat would leave America at the mercy of the British Empire, permanently. After the crushing loss of the capital, America's fate is more uncertain than ever. As the British advance from Washington on the morning of Friday, August 25, 1814, the city of Baltimore braces for attack.
So your political capital has been defeated, and now they're moving up the Chesapeake Bay to the large port city of Baltimore, which has always been sort of this thorn in the side of the British.
The burning of Washington was an insult, but the lifeblood of the economy pumps through the port of Baltimore.
Baltimore was known as a nest of pirates by the British, or enterprising privateers if you're on the American side.
In wartime, it was legal for a private vessel to attack and raid a foreign ship. Baltimore had grown rich off stolen